Okay, so we're now going to move on to Margaux's panel and discussing Bitcoin, blockchain, and cryptocurrency technology, which probably many people who think about that think of it as just as a digital electronic way to do financial transactions the same way you would with cash in the physical world. But actually there's a tremendous potential for far more than that, including secure messaging using the same types of technology and the ability to basically govern the internet and supplant the current DNS system with something more decentralized and secure. So there's, give us the big picture here and we'll go from there.
Thanks, David. And thanks to the Internet Society, Brooklyn Law School, New York Chapter, Federal Communication Bar Associations, and Disruptive Technologists. And thanks everyone for being here, and thanks my panelists. And happy Veterans Day if there are any veterans out there. My name is Margaux Avedison. I was an early entrepreneur in the Bitcoin space. In 2012, I relaunched the first Bitcoin American exchange. And I've been doing a bunch of other projects. And besides consulting, I just co-founded a crypto media company where we're making a television show to get a lot of these complicated concepts in a very entertaining and palatable way to the general public. And so this panel is going to be about what infrastructure is needed for cryptocurrency. And as David mentioned, cryptocurrency isn't just a currency. When we hear Bitcoin, for example, it's easy to get stuck on Bitcoin, the currency. But the underlying technology and protocol is really interesting. There's a lot of uses for it. And there's other protocols that have even been built on top of the Bitcoin protocol, and even separate crypto protocols that have their own blockchain. And there's a lot of interesting things and peer-to-peer situations that have been going on. Some examples are smart contracts or crypto securities. And before I introduce the panel, I'm going to individually introduce them, and we'll have time for questions at the end before we get into a discussion with the panelists. So first, we have Erik Anderson from Bloomberg. He's a senior lead engineer at Bloomberg and also chairman of the World Wide Web Consortium Payments Group. Erik was also very instrumental in getting Bitcoin on the Bloomberg terminals. So Erik, my question to you is, Bloomberg thinks of itself as sitting squarely in between innovation and technology. And they also compared Bitcoin as sitting squarely between Bitcoin and technology. Does Bloomberg have any plans to do anything with this technology and at the very least open up trading of Bitcoin and other digital assets through the platform, or through the terminals?
Oh boy, what can I get in trouble with there, confirming this stuff on there? Well, I can't confirm what Bloomberg itself is going to do with the technology, but pretty much all financial services is looking at Bloomberg, Bitcoin, not only the currency, but Bitcoin, the technology that the Bitcoin, the currency, is built on top of. So it's a very it's a great field on there. It offers the opportunity to penetrate into Kenya and give financial banking and services to people that can't be banked. And there's also a lot of value just in the technologies itself, and redoing some of the financial infrastructure that's currently out there. Right now, a lot of the security that's putting banking on there is put at the line level, meaning the actual fiber cables that people are using between the banks, where and they're not actually protecting the contents of the financial transaction itself. You can use a public internet for a lot of this stuff. So, I mean, Bloomberg is very interested in this, but so is all of financial services, SEC, governments, banks, you name it. They're all involved.
And is the World Wide Web Consortium Payments Group, are you guys working on any standards that have to do with digital assets or digital currency right now?
Yes, sorry. I actually wear two hats. I'm also the chair for the W3C Web Payments. So anytime you type www. I'm actually the chair for the payment side of that. So we're looking at trying to, it's very costly for developers and companies to deploy their own payment infrastructure. So we're looking at not only creating very easy APIs that developers can make use of and create their own real cool applications, not worry about deployment of the infrastructure. So yes, but once that APIs and standards come out, then it'll be implemented right at the browser level. And you know that pretty much the browser will have full penetration on every mobile device and desktop and PC in the world. So at that point, you'll be able to light up everybody's device in the world as financial terminals that people can actually make use of digital currency. So there's a lot of value there from the private, but there's a large entrepreneurial level too as well. So I'm helping to lead those efforts for many reasons. So.
Great, thanks. Next is Patrick Deegan. He is CTO and Chief Architect of D3, which is a nonprofit MIT Labs started. Could you, Patrick, tell us a little bit about D3 and Mustard Seed and what you guys are working on?
Okay, sure. Let's see. So ID Cubed, or otherwise ID3, is a nonprofit spin-off of the MIT Media Lab. To sort of give some background on that, one of the co-founders is Alex Pentland, who runs a laboratory in the Media Lab, is otherwise known for seeing things like Google Glass come out as a group, and so more recently has moved into sort of studying how human innovation occurs through groups and social contact, so studying social media, and sort of within that realm, it became very much an important question to consider how these studies would be conducted. Would the privacy of those being essentially recorded or otherwise having data collected off their mobile phones become an issue? And so how could you make it more of a participation where those individuals were opting into agreements and offering up their data and seeing the social benefits that would occur from increased sharing and less friction in those types of studies in those environments. So as kind of a grounding point, that helped frame some of the architectural decisions around Open Mustard Seed. So we initially started out trying to figure out, many years ago, how one would scale a totally decentralized system that really empowered the user with control of their own data, or even personal data independence. And what that basically amounted to was developing the infrastructure that could self-deploy and give each user their own infrastructure. So the ability to create their own private networks, their own private clouds, their own private personal data stores, and even to seed their identity across the internet so that they could transact with other people and still have the same benefits of the sharing and also aggregation. So in a way, it was kind of counter to big data in the sense that we thought of the individual as sort of a micro refinery, or as a source of data that could then be aggregated, and the concern was really, when that aggregation occurs, how can users' privacy and security be respected?
And the Windover proposal was just released with 21 Bitcoin companies coming on board. Can you tell us a little bit about the Windover proposal, please?
Sure. So I guess as a follow-on to some of Open Mustard Seed's goals, we saw a really great opportunity in FinCEN, in the sense that a lot of the systems that we were building were, again, self-executing and self-healing. And if we could bring the same technology to bear in situations where regulation could occur algorithmically, then we saw, again, another opportunity for lowering the friction, increasing the performance. So in working with a lot of the digital currency companies, we set out in sort of a dialogue and tried to develop a set of principles that would help further innovation while we're kind of in this incubation or early period, or maybe even an adolescence, where we need to be able to make mistakes and understand the sort of choices we'd make, especially as we're handing over the governance of these systems more and more to algorithms. So it would be unfortunate if there were more situations like Mt. Gox, or times where regulation was too strong before we really understood the implications of the technology and how we might best use them for positive social change.
From my understanding, the Windover proposal was basically open source software where all these Bitcoin and digital currency companies didn't have to do all the work with creating their own AML, KYC, know your customer type sign-on, and also not having the user's actual private information. It's in a cloud. And I read some criticism, and I'm not sure whether or not this is valid, but someone on Bitcoin Talk said how it's basically a buffet for governments. And also, in the cloud, how is that protected, since we've had a lot of issues with the cloud being hacked, Apple, for
Sure.
example?
Yeah, that was one of my favorite comments. So I guess, unpacking that and rewinding a little, there's a sense that the cryptocurrency or the Bitcoin world has an identity crisis, we might say. So again, how can we afford to move forward and see a lot of innovation occur without kind of having the stuttering effect where situations that when they go awry are not well contained or otherwise protecting individual identity or making sure that transactions occur and regulation is able to apply that actually protects the interests of the consumer. So, I guess the comment was referring to, one solution to that would be to allow a sort of backdoor, allow a massive amount of surveillance to ensure that all transactions in the system were lawful, that all participants in the network were acting fairly. And that seemed really counter to some of the, I think, core pieces of Bitcoin, in the sense of anonymity. So there, I guess, is a whole, side of Bitcoin that I think fairly seeks to make sure that the protocol is free and open and its use remain unrestricted. So in that sense, I think the misinterpretation of our intent might have come from thinking that we're trying to open the door for regulation to occur. And I guess, I'll point out that, you can make private networks, you can make systems that are dark, but there are a lot of opportunities to make systems that are regulated well and that achieve high level performance, so we actually see the benefit. I guess one example I would point out is sort of decentralized eBay. If everyone in that network was anonymous and did not have a reputation score, then you would have really no way to underwrite the risk of going into a transaction. And I think that would severely inhibit how successful those enterprises would be. So developing a system like Open Mustard Seed or going forward with the Windhover principles, I think, is a way of saying, we can help build infrastructure that leads to really effective products and services for consumers, and I think a lot of the Bitcoin companies reflected that sentiment.
Thanks. Next we have Adam Krellenstein. He's co-founder and lead developer of Counterparty. Adam, can you explain what Counterparty is, please?
Sure. So Counterparty is one of those financial protocols that builds on top of the Bitcoin technology and the Bitcoin blockchain and uses it for more than the Bitcoin currency. Counterparty's protocol was created about 10 months ago, and it's used for general peer-to-peer finance, trustless peer-to-peer finance, the way that Bitcoin itself is used only for a payment protocol. It has lots of smart contracts built in. It has the ability to do decentralized trade, to be able to create arbitrary digital tokens, reissue, transfer, and so on. You can do binary options. You can do prediction markets, and so on, all using the Bitcoin blockchain, all secured by the Bitcoin mining network, using that infrastructure for more general purposes.
So is this legal? What's the regulation around Counterparty?
So I'm not a lawyer. I've spoken to lawyers about this. Yeah, I mean, so Counterparty is a piece of open source software which can be used for legal and illegal purposes, just as Bitcoin can. You can use Bitcoin for money laundering. You can use it for illicit transactions. And we're using Bitcoin, and pretty much everything. It's really a toolkit, and it can be used in many different jurisdictions for many different purposes. It doesn't really make sense to ask, I guess, upon deeper inspection, whether or not Counterparty is illegal or legal. It's just code. The running of it would be illegal or legal.
Wait, the running of Counterparty would be illegal?
Yeah, in certain jurisdictions doing certain things. If you use Counterparty, it's certainly legal to run. If you use Counterparty to do illegal things, just as if you use Bitcoin to do illegal things, then it becomes illegal. But Counterparty, the code isn't illegal.
You don't need a money transmitter license
to run Counterparty? Certainly not. Running a Bitcoin full node makes you much more like a money transmitter than running a Counterparty node. A Counterparty node doesn't do anything except for create and parse Bitcoin transactions.
So Counterparty wasn't listed as one of the 21 companies that supported the Windover principles. Is there a reason for that?
So I hadn't heard of it actually until today. Sorry to say, so we haven't been a company. We just created a foundation. We just announced it maybe 3 weeks ago. And it's going to be a nonprofit foundation dedicated to ensuring the integrity of the protocol and marshaling resources for its development. I'll take a close look and I'll bring it to the board.
Okay, because Counterparty was mentioned in this kind of long rant where it talked about being a buffet for the government. So I thought maybe you guys were making some sort of stand against it. So Patrick Byrne from Overstock just recently announced that he chose Counterparty to eventually issue his stock as a digital asset. Can you tell us a little bit about that project? I believe it's called Medici, and two of your co-founders are now working for Overstock. So what's going on with that?
So Medici is the name of this product at Overstock.com to build a stock market on top of the Bitcoin blockchain. Using Counterparty, using the Counterparty network and using Counterparty tokens. So as I mentioned, with Counterparty, you can create a digital token. You can trade it trustlessly, atomically with any other party. And when you trade the digital tokens themselves, you eliminate a lot of the problems that have arisen with the current financial system. Issues like rehypothecation, where you don't actually own the shares in the company that you think you own. You actually own contractual rights to those shares and to the fraction of the company. And in a liquidity crisis, you might not actually get those shares because it's written to the contracts that you only get the fraction that is available. And so with Counterparty technology and the Counterparty network, you can replace that rather opaque and fragile system with one that's much more robust and open. And you can have the digital tokens themselves represent stock in a company. And you can trade those trustlessly without the counterparty risk. And use this technology to really make trading of equity, crypto securities and equity generally into the peer-to-peer process that it should be, going back to the way financial markets used to be run, where you don't need, say, high-frequency trading.
When is this going to kind of launch and take off? Is there a timeline for that?
A very rough timeline. The barriers are all legal. They're not technological. The Counterparty network is up and running, and one can do a whole lot with it with the way that it is now. Of course, there are things like front ends to be developed. But yeah, the primary barriers are legal. That said, the legal situation is actually much more tractable than one might expect it to be. There are frameworks in place for making such a decentralized Bitcoin-based securities exchange a reality. And I don't know. As I understand it, they have a very good plan for realizing it very soon.
Great, thanks. And next we have Jeffrey Alberts. He is a partner at Pryor Cashman, and he does white-collar defense and used to work for he was an assistant DA in New York for 6 years before that, so he was prosecuting white-collar crime. You're also one of Ethereum's lawyers, is that correct, Jeffrey?
Yes.
Okay, and could you explain a little bit why that crowd sale was theoretically okay, legal, regulatory-wise to do?
No. Unlike the many people here who have offered the disclaimer that they are not a lawyer, I actually am a lawyer. In fact, coming here reminds me that this is where I studied to take the bar exam. I didn't go to school here, but I lived in Fort Greene, which is nearby. And so I came to Brooklyn Law School to study for the bar exam. So this brings back a lot of memories that are kind of stress-ridden. But associated with being a lawyer, I can't really speak publicly about my client, but I can speak generally about a lot of the infrastructure issues that my clients face. I have a lot of different clients, and one thing that you see, first of all, a lot of times they view the law as a barrier to moving forward, and it can be a barrier. But I think the most important thing for a lot of these young emerging companies that want to move forward is just to have a very clear sense of what the law is. Because the most dangerous thing where you have a lot of different entrepreneurs and talented coders who are they're willing to go out and build something that can be beautiful, that can advance society, but they go charging off in the wrong direction if they don't know where the limits of the law are. So right now we're at a phase where the uncertainty in the legal landscape makes it difficult for a lot of young entrepreneurs to really build their businesses because they don't know which ways they can build. And once we get to a greater amount of certainty, it will be easier for people to challenge the talent they have to move in a direction that's going to be productive. So that's definitely along the theme that we're addressing today of building an infrastructure that will allow virtual currency to advance. I think that's a really important step that needs to be taken. And it's being taken, but not as quickly as some would hope.
Well, do you think a lot of that has to do with there aren't really any clear rules or laws or regulations for a lot of this stuff in the industry? Like, how can you pick a clear path to go if there really isn't any rules on the books about what to do with selling a digital asset, a token? Like, if I made a digital currency and wanted to do a crowd sale with that, there isn't a law that says that, and is that legal, or could the SEC come after me if I'm dealing with the general public? There's a lot of, what's okay and what's not.
Sure. The answer to your question is yes. But I think just stepping back more generally, the law is developing. It depends on the specific area of law. There are areas of law in which the law is fairly well developed and you can get a legal answer. There's other areas of law where the laws themselves are ambiguous and it's difficult to tell what the answer is. And unfortunately, there's a third area right now where there isn't a law, but there clearly is about to be one. So we're in New York now, and the Department of Financial Services has announced that it's going to be imposing some form of regulations, the BitLicense regulations, and they've published them, but we know they're going to change and they haven't been enacted yet. So everybody in New York who's trying to figure out how to move forward with their business doesn't know which direction to head, because even though there is some guidance out there, everybody knows that guidance is going to change and they don't know how it's going to change. So yes, the fact that there are no laws that are specific, that are well formed and can be easily applied to a rapidly changing technology is a problem. But the fact that the Department of Financial Services is devoting resources to clearly articulating what the law is in some sense a step in the right direction, even though some of those laws may be a little overly burdensome for young startup companies. It'll be good to at least know what the law is.
So would you recommend people just doing their company and try to interpret what little regulation, law, guidance there is, and then change along the way? Is the government going to be favorable to that? Because like now the SEC is coming after companies for things they did, 2.5 years ago when Bitcoin was, worth $10, if, $5, even that.
Sure. I mean, I used to be I was a federal prosecutor, so I was actually in the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Manhattan. And when you're on that side, you absolutely do take into account when you're deciding whether to go forward with an enforcement action, or I was a criminal prosecutor, so whether to arrest and indict someone, you do take into account whether they made their best efforts to comply with the law. And it's definitely the case that in a situation like you have here, where the technology is rapidly changing and the law is rapidly changing, people are going to be understanding of that. So I would expect that, for example, if FinCEN is trying to apply a regulation that it very recently interpreted itself in an area that's highly ambiguous, they're unlikely, for example, to immediately jump to imposing a fine. They're much more likely to say, hey, we think you should register. Why don't you go ahead and register? As opposed to, you referenced cases that have recently been brought by the SEC that relate to actions that took place a couple years ago. I think the SEC's position there, I know the SEC's position there, is that that wasn't a close line. Like, if you take, for example, the Shavers case that recently came out, the SEC alleged that Shavers went out and told a bunch of people that he was going to do one thing with their Bitcoin, that he was going to engage in virtual currency arbitrage with it, and in fact he used it to pay his rent and to pay off casino debts that he had. And I'm not saying that's true or false, I don't know, those are just the allegations, but you can see how that would be something that it's not really, the SEC's position is that's not close to the line. That doesn't have to do with an ambiguity about whether something's technically a security, it's just about making intentional misrepresentations. So it may turn out that he's innocent, it may turn out that he's guilty, but I think it's clear that when the government decided to go forward, it wasn't going forward in an area where they thought there was a legitimate ambiguity. They thought there was no ambiguity. They thought that clearly what you said to people you knew was false, and you took their money in an attempt to steal from them.
Thanks. Okay, so now anyone can answer these questions. And before we get to the obstacles, I have a question about, let's say Bloomberg or NASDAQ decides to get into the cryptocurrency game. Besides having the resources, what are the advantages that they would probably have over a startup, besides obviously the money? And would that be a good thing for cryptocurrency and that technology? Anyone?
Well, it almost sounds like the question was directed at me. So, it's been going back and forth where we're wondering if right now is the time that the Bitcoin starts getting absorbed into the seam of the state and the larger organizations on there, because they have the framework for doing the compliance. They have the framework for the money handling in all the states. We have a global organization and 60 different offices and all that in various different countries. Are there advantages to it? As you try and centralize some of those assets, I think there's a lot of advantages to Bitcoin to being adopted in the financial services world. Yes, I think it'll help out quite a bit for the adoption throughout the rest of the world, but I don't think it'll just end up being Bitcoin or just Bloomberg or any other company out there. I think it's going to be companies at large are very interested in this because it offers a lot of key advantages that are out there. It allows you digital frameworks for taking back your identifiers, right? And it allows you to, one of the points that some people may have lost up here, but there's two people on here that are looking at algorithms trying to replace some compliance officers out there and filter through, illegal transactions. So why can't you use technology to self-regulate technology? That's a really big thing out there. So since the Bitcoin community is basically, it's R&D's largest community out there, start redirecting some of those resources to helping out in these areas that are really needed instead of like trying to fork Bitcoin and create your own little digital currencies on there. There's a lot of advantages to doing it, and I think the larger companies that start adopting and picking these things up are going to push them in the right directions for business needs versus some overzealous entrepreneurs on there wanting to, solve problems that are not really problems. But there's a lot of places that you can use these technologies to, streamline a lot of the processes that are bound out there and then have the human factor behind it. I want to quote a very good friend of mine, I won't give him a name, but Morgan Stanley started off many years ago, not that many lawyers. Now it's thousands of lawyers that are in there trying to do compliance software when you can replace or augment them with the use of technologies that are currently there. So larger corporations that will adopt Bitcoin, I think it's going to be good for the overall economy. You need people to adopt it and help make use of it. Did I answer the question?
Yes, great job there.
Thanks.
What's some other infrastructure that's needed to really push cryptocurrency ahead? It's open to everyone.
Okay, I guess maybe I'll take a crack at it. So the core infrastructure of the of cryptocurrencies are blockchains, and right now there are, I don't know, around 500 blockchains. Oh, right, sure, okay. So a blockchain is a shared ledger in a network of computers that generally anyone can run, and it's a write-only ledger, and one whose state is agreed upon by all the participants of the network, and so it grows in length and size as new transactions, new history is added to that ledger, and it's secured by various means. That's to say, there's generally a mechanism by which nodes can tell a true copy of the blockchain from a false one. It's called a blockchain because it's generally a linear sequence of blocks. A block being a collection of transactions or actions in the ledger. In Bitcoin's case, it's really just transactions. And Bitcoin blocks are about a megabyte and come in about 10-minute intervals in time. And so there are about 500 blocks. The vast majority of blockchains, the vast majority of them are copies of Bitcoin. In general, blockchains are secured by proof of work, which uses cryptography to ensure that it requires a commensurate amount of effort to change the ledger and to add to the ledger, just to simplify it. That's really the only well-established method of securing a blockchain. There are these miners. They collect fees and they collect rewards for securing the chain by wasting energy, as it were. And the vast majority of chains are very, very small, and the currencies on top of those chains are very, very don't have very much value. Bitcoin is to date, I think, about 90% of the value of all blockchains, or of all cryptocurrencies, at about, I don't know, $5 billion as the money supply, and all those other chains that don't have that value aren't sufficiently rewarding the parties that are securing the blockchains, so as to ensure that the blockchain can't be rewritten by a malicious party or by a self-interested party, and that means that most of the cryptocurrencies and innovation that's happening off of the Bitcoin blockchain in terms of cryptocurrency protocols and peer-to-peer finance aren't very well secured at all. It's only a matter of time, or in some cases a matter of history, that these chains are being attacked. And there isn't really a good alternative to proof of work, and there isn't really an alternative to having the value of the chain, the security of the chain, or the security of the chain be dependent upon the value of the currency lying on top of it. So that makes really Bitcoin and Bitcoin's blockchain the only real, really secure and trustworthy piece of cryptocurrency infrastructure. That whole idea is part of the basis for Counterparty, which is using the Bitcoin blockchain for the development of these new features, as opposed to creating a new chain, which is what most projects do and have done. And so what we need is we really need a consolidation of a lot of the innovation, a lot of the entrepreneurship in the cryptocurrency space to consolidate onto the Bitcoin blockchain, where there really is strength in numbers, where the value of one currency or one protocol on top of Bitcoin reinforces the value of another, instead of dividing those resources and that security. Yeah, I think that's my answer.
So, does that mean you're not a fan of Ethereum?
Oh, no, I'm a fan. I think that I really admire a lot of what Ethereum is doing. I think the general approach is misguided. I think that as a rule, software development and particularly in this space, all development should be incremental, and it should work from firm foundations. Ethereum's architecture is very good, but they're going to have, I predict, very serious security issues arising from the fact that they're using a new blockchain. I think that the Bitcoin blockchain is more than enough. It's more than sufficient. And by that, of course, I mean that it's much more secure than the Ethereum blockchain can or will be in the near future, simply because it's more established and more valuable. I think, yeah, the general approach should be to work from Bitcoin because of its security and also because of its use, because of its adoption. Building on top of the Bitcoin blockchain means you can more easily integrate with Bitcoin, the currency, instead of creating a new blockchain and having a totally separate, independent ecosystem, which requires you to start from zero. In software, as a rule, you have to be careful of reinventing the wheel and building and starting from scratch, to build a more elegant architecture. The architecture of Ethereum is very elegant and simple, but more incremental evolutionary changes tend to be more successful.
So actually, I'd like to jump in and press you on something. Just through some informal discussions with people around, the campfire in comparing and contrasting Ethereum and Counterparty, we're supposing that Counterparty can accomplish 80 to 90% of what Ethereum is going to enable with their Turing complete scripting language and all of that very elegant architecture. So, could you substantiate that percentage at all? And if so, do you think that's sufficient to really catalyze an immense amount of progress in the industry, or should we maybe wait around for Ethereum and see if it's got some magic that?
I think yeah. I don't think you should wait. The rule with software development is that you need to release early, release often, and that you can wait a long time, waiting for the GNU herd or Plan 9 to gain maturity and adoption, and you can still be waiting for those hardware drivers to show up. And Counterparty's here today and now, and has it certainly has the vast majority of the functionality. I don't know what the percentage would be. A priori, there's nothing that Ethereum can do that Counterparty can't do except have a shorter block time, except have a different structure for the blockchain and a different mining algorithm. Though you could theoretically put that in Bitcoin too. It's very very flexible to have this meta layer, this protocol layer on top of Bitcoin, where all that the miners do is secure the network. So I don't really know from a financial protocol perspective what Counterparty can't do, so yeah, I wouldn't wait. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah.
Have you guys looked into side chains? Do you have any opinions on that?
I do. Side chains are they're not a new idea, and they are not particularly innovative. Yeah, sure. So a side chain, the idea behind a side chain is to create a new blockchain, like I mentioned before, But instead of having a new blockchain separate from Bitcoin's and having a new currency on top of that blockchain, the way that Litecoin or Namecoin does, is to have the same currency tied to both chains. And the way you do this is you have the main Bitcoin client, Bitcoin core, sort of watch both chains and agree on and use both chains as sources of information about the state of one network. The side chains. So yeah, you create a new blockchain. There's no potential for innovation in blockchains that hasn't already existed. There's nothing that sidechains can do in terms of technology that Namecoin can't, or that Litecoin can't, or that Purecoin can't. Nothing at all. All it can do is it can share the Bitcoin currency, and that's a good thing to allow for new blockchain mechanics and new blockchain structure, faster block times, whatever, and still be able to use the Bitcoin currency, which, as I mentioned, has this positive feedback loop in terms of adoption and usage. However, it's not going to kill anything. It's not going to kill altcoins. It's not going to replace innovation through separate chains with separate currencies, or innovation on top of the Bitcoin blockchain. Moreover, when you have a separate blockchain with a separate currency, or with the same currency, such as sidechains would have, and indeed they're very far off in terms of development, you lose that incentive for securing that chain. When you create a separate chain, normally the miners of that chain will be paid in that chain's currency. But if that chain doesn't have its own currency, because it's Bitcoin, then there's no incentive whatsoever to mine the chain. And the only way you get the mining of that separate chain, the extension of the ledger, the addition of transactions to that ledger, is by asking the miners of Bitcoin, of the main chain, to mine it for free. And you have to trust them entirely in doing so. It's called merged mining. And merged mining makes it absolutely free for those miners of the main chain to attack the side chain. So not only does it do side chains, which are not yet around and won't be around for a while, not have any technical innovation in terms of blockchain mechanics or features, but they also have very bad security properties necessarily.
Thanks. Jeffrey, could you maybe sum up the regulatory environment right now for digital currency and where you think it might go?
Sure. There's kind of two different environments depending on whether you're on the regular side or the side of kind of virtual currency entrepreneurs. But I think right now the regulatory environment is being driven largely by these big new cases that keep coming out, Silk Road case and similar cases that they put virtual currency in a very bad light, and it makes regulators who really only have an incentive to keep things safe want to be erring on the side of keeping things too safe. So if you impose regulations that are so strict, it makes it impossible for innovation to occur. You end up hurting the very consumers that you're trying to protect. And I think right now there's a little bit of a shift in that direction. But fortunately, the virtual currency community has very effective lobbyists, and members of the community themselves are very articulate and are able to articulate the importance of the projects they're working on to regulators. So you're now seeing regulators who appear and are fairly knowledgeable about how virtual currencies work, unusually so. And I think because virtual currency entrepreneurs are so vocal and believe so much in what they're doing. So you're now starting to see, while on the one hand they're very concerned and their first instinct is to be overly cautious, you're seeing them try to move back towards imposing a set of regulations that could still allow some virtual currency enterprises to thrive. And we don't know where it's going to fall right now, but I think that's the general overview of what's going on with regulation. And to get into more details, you'd have to be very nuanced because it's totally different regulations. You have FinCEN, you have SEC, you have the New York Department of Financial Services, the CFTC, the IRS. they've all taken kind of different positions, and it would take a while to articulate them all. But I think that's the general sense of where we are. Is there was initially a very strong negative reaction due to these the large criminal cases that came out, and there's still that inclination, but they're moving back towards modifying that overreaction towards imposing some form of regulation that would still allow these entrepreneurs to do business.
The superintendent of financial services, Losky, is leaving next year to join the private sector. Do you think that is going to positively or negatively affect bit licenses, and do you have any idea who could potentially replace him, whether it's someone going to be pro digital currency or the other way?
Well, I don't want to speculate about who's going to replace Ben Losky. In terms of the impact that it's likely to have on the bit license, pro or con, it would depend on who's going to replace him. I think he actually is one of the regulators who's taken time to kind of learn about Bitcoin, I think more than a lot of other regulators have, especially at being the head of the organization. And he's been willing to subject himself to, like, he voluntarily has appeared at conferences like this one and taken questions from people in the community, which he doesn't have to do. And lots of other regulators wouldn't, because they'd be nervous or they didn't have the basic understanding. So I think in that sense that he's really tried to engage, it will be something of a loss, because you want, whether a regulator is overly aggressive or not aggressive, you want them to make a genuine effort to understand the areas in which they're regulating. I think he has done that, but we'll see what the next regime brings.
Do you know if he's leaving before BitLicense kind of comes to law?
We don't know when the BitLicense will become effective. It kind of will depend. I think early next year. Locke said early next year would be the time that it potentially could become enacted. But at this point, it's possible that there would be multiple rewritings of the law. So right now there was a comment period. The ball's in the court of the Department of Financial Services. They could just come out with a new regulation. Although I think they would have to do at least one more comment period if they change the regulation. And sometimes you can have several rounds of regulations coming out, people submitting comments. So at this point, it's really difficult to predict when the final enactment would happen.
Is it unusual for a regulator who's been kind of pushing legislation through and getting a lot of media for it to leave before it actually comes to law? Is this like a strange situation or no?
No, it's really not strange. It often takes a very long time between when a regulation is initially imposed and when it ultimately becomes a law. Like, just to take another example, there's a regulation in the banking industry where a lot of the same people who have been concerned about the use of virtual currency have been concerned about the fact that banks don't have as much information about beneficial owners of accounts as the regulators and investigators think they should have. So they proposed a law that would require banks to take additional information about the beneficial owners of bank accounts. That's been like 2 years already since it was initially proposed, and it's still, no final regulation has yet been enacted. So I don't think the timeline is that significant.
Okay. You mentioned banks, and from the digital currency entrepreneur side, getting a bank account is really difficult. Adam, have you encountered any difficulty getting a bank account with Counterparty?
No. So Counterparty has always been a purely open source project, and none of the creators of Counterparty nor the Counterparty Foundation, now that it's in existence, has ever taken any funds from users except for donations. And those tend to be in Bitcoin, right? We don't hold any user funds. We don't handle user funds whatsoever. So we've asked, yeah.
Jeffrey, do you see banks being more lenient to letting digital currency companies open bank accounts anytime soon?
Well, it's actually not so much the banks, it's more the banks' regulators. Like just to take an example, over the last couple of years, a lot of banks have been shutting down the bank accounts of foreign diplomats. So not just diplomats from countries that are viewed as potential money laundering risks, but even I think there was a case where a French diplomat was unable to open a bank account, and the U.S. government had to kind of intercede and find a banking institution where they could open an account. And it's not because the banks genuinely think that diplomats are all a bunch of criminals. Of course they're not. Some may be, some aren't. They're diplomats. The concern was just it required so much work to monitor the accounts in a way that would satisfy the regulators, and the regulators expressed so much concern about the possibility that that form of bank account would be used for money laundering that it just wasn't worth it for the banks. The compliance cost was going to be more per month than the amount they would make on the account, so they wouldn't do it. And I think banks are the same way. It's not that they, some banks may be genuinely suspicious, but a lot of them think they'd be totally happy to process for virtual currency companies, but their regulator gets so stressed out about it and pressures them so much that they have to devote a compliance person to spend a huge amount of their time monitoring that account and figuring out how virtual currency works, and that just costs more money than the amount they would get paid in fees out of the account, so they don't do it. And so it's being driven really by regulators more than banks' genuine concern. So you really don't need to persuade the banks as much as the banks' regulators.
Interesting. Do you want to open up the questions? I don't know. I can see if anyone in the audience has questions. Okay. Okay, we're going to open it up to questions now. Does anyone in the audience have a question for our panel? No?
I can make a comment. This Thursday, so 2 days from today, I'm doing a meetup specifically on sidechains. So if anyone's interested on talking that topic ad nauseum, feel free to reach out.
Okay, if no one has any questions, I would just like everyone on the panel maybe to give one suggestion on how they think we could improve the infrastructure of digital currency. If there's any thoughts, final thought. Eric?
Yeah, actually, there's been a lot of research over the last decade on using mathematical algorithms to basically to regulate financial transactions and take a look at those. So supporting the companies that are actually trying to do this and reduce the overall cost, because there has to be a benefit for adopting these technologies on there. And one of the largest, there's two things that the banks are looking at on there. One is reducing fees on there, but they also is be able to reduce the cost of the transaction and the compliance itself. So I view that as a very important technology on there. Also the W3C's efforts on there as well, but saving the money and reducing compliance costs are probably the two largest things of helping virtual currencies move along. I mean, even any kind of banking framework using pure digital assets on there.
Okay, sure. As far as infrastructure, I think maybe the single most interesting thing that I'm looking forward to is smart contracts really becoming ubiquitous. I'm particularly interested in seeing how Counterparty evolves, and especially in terms of decentralized governance of the actual building up and maintenance of your platform. You know, the elimination of the open source benevolent dictator for life to be replaced by a group of peers that are rewarded based off their participation and would earn privileges that would allow them to influence the governance and you know, be able to you know, take control of how the bounties are created, assessed, and overall what direction a project might go in. So you know, I'm interested to see how that you know, the entire community is able to more walk the walk or eat its own dog food per se.
So I guess I'll start by answering that. We're I don't know, working hard to do that particular thing, and one way of doing that is through proof of stake voting. So XCP, the native currency of Counterparty, represents stake in the protocol, and we're moving to make it possible for holders of XCP to use the Counterparty protocol to vote on changes to the Counterparty protocol at the protocol level. the first step will be not to do it at the at the protocol level, but rather have, say, the foundation hold a vote and have XCP voters, say, vote on a community representative on the board of directors. That'll happen. The next step is to have the protocol itself recognize the results of votes, and change its values based on that result. And that's not at all far away. That's readily doable, even within the existing framework. I'm very excited about that possibility myself. I guess beyond that, in terms of what infrastructure we need, I guess I'll just take the opportunity and plug Counterparty some more. I don't get any money when you use it. It's totally free. But I think it's really I'm working on it because I think it's the right direction. It's going in the right direction. It's the right thing to do. All of you today can go on, can use Counterparty, can use CounterWallet, the web wallet where you don't hold any of your funds, and you can create your own token, and you can trade that token around, and you can do it with anyone in the world for free, for a small Bitcoin fee, which paid to Bitcoin miners, and effectively, instantly, and trustlessly, and that's something very new and very powerful. That idea. And it's a reality now, and I encourage you to do that and to start businesses on Counterparty, and so on. And if you have any questions, come talk to me about that, and I'll help you do it.
So I guess in terms of the legal infrastructure, as my comments earlier suggested, I think the most useful thing would just be for those government agencies that view themselves as potential regulators of virtual currency to issue clear guidance so that entrepreneurs who are trying to build a business can build a business knowing that they're going to be on the right side of the law and not having to expend resources constantly to try to predict which way the government's going to move in the future. I think if they have clear guidance, they'll be able to move much quicker, and it will be helpful for the industry.
Thanks. Does anyone on the panel have questions for each other? Yeah, I'm not gonna say that. No. All right, thank you. Oh. Okay.
What do you think the time frame would be to a much larger adoption of Bitcoin or other digital currencies by both investors and consumers, where there's a point where there's enough trust, the trust level in terms of consumers and investors is high enough so that they would adopt the use of Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies on a large scale?
I guess we can all give our 2 cents, but I actually think it's going to happen when they don't know that they're using it. I think it'll be like when they decided to adopt JavaScript. Like, they just use it. They didn't decide to use it. I think they'll engage in transactions. They'll use applications that have virtual currency technologies and cryptocurrency technologies embedded in the applications that they're just using because it's convenient and on their phone. And these guys know better than I do how long it's going to take for that to happen. But right now, most people that use virtual currencies are using it as an intentional choice. Like, I'm going to use a Bitcoin application. I'm going to use a virtual currency. And I think we need to get to the point where people are just using an application that is useful, and they don't know that the guts of that application are using cryptocurrency technology.
So really, the barrier is the development of those front ends.
Yeah, the user-friendly kind of overlay.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Bitcoin is I think very well suited for back-end work, and all cryptocurrencies. It's not a user-friendly protocol. Things like the 10-minute block time are barriers to adoption, and you have to paper over them. I don't know that the problem is trust. I don't know that users aren't paying for their coffee with Bitcoin because they lack trust in Bitcoin. Not that Bitcoin's particularly great for paying for coffee, but I mean, I think that's probably the reason why Amazon isn't. I mean, it's just speculation, totally outside my area of expertise. Why Amazon isn't using Bitcoin is because Bitcoin isn't big enough or well established enough. That said, you do have more moderately sized online retailers already using Bitcoin, not pushing it too heavily, and that's why they're not seeing very much adoption, and also because they lack front ends. But when I think about the next stage in terms of adoption of Bitcoin, I think that it'll probably come from online retailers first, or things like micropayments, where Bitcoin really does immediately provide a tangible benefit for, in terms of revenue, in terms of security, in terms of lack of chargebacks, in terms of fees for these existing merchants and content providers.
Yeah, so I want to mirror all of that and maybe add a couple of things. I think that you made the remark about trust, and I guess I would agree that there'll be certain transactions that can happen today if the convenience were there without the trust. So if you made it, for instance, so easy that you didn't even know you were using Bitcoin, then I think there's a lot of opportunities for advance there. So, in the very short term, we're likely to see some, very sort of specific targeted applications that would be relying on Bitcoin or the underlying protocol. Above and beyond that, I think as an alternative to, for instance, using a credit card, there's still certain advantages in terms of fraud protection without the trust that credit card companies bear the weight of. So with the regulation and the effect that when there's fraudulent activity on your card, a consumer isn't liable above a certain limit. Those things not being present in Bitcoin make it so that we may not see very large transactions be happening anytime soon until there's a substantial substrate that provides the trust or the reputation system or identity system so that you can actually have the risk that you're taking on in such a transaction either be underwritten by a third party or have other agencies able to regulate the system so that there's at least some minimum levels of risk that are being held or algorithmically constrained so that again, another opportunity for something like a smart contract to be able to regulate the system, provide a equitable identity and reputation system that wouldn't be subject to civil attacks and things like that, I think would really be required before we see much more mainstream adoption. And then I guess the classical comparisons to the formation of the internet, maybe if we're and I've heard this a few times now, sort of the Mosaic early days, then maybe 20 years from now we're going to be the first Bitcoin bubble might occur, but I think the people who are making those comments are accurately saying that it's going to be significantly faster, that we might see that kind of effect in the next 5 to 8 years.
Are there any projects like that out there, those projects you develop, or some kind of initiative to develop a structure that would provide that level of trust?
Yeah, I mean that's exactly one of Open Mustard Seed's goals. To have an ecosystem framework that allows for rapid experimentation, developer convenience, the community to flourish with a strong sense of individual and sovereign ownership of a data and identity, and the ability to build reputation systems that are self-executing and self-healing and otherwise setting the stage for sort of algorithmic governance, something where everything can be automated. But then I think the interesting world we get into is it start to look like Terry Gilliam's Brazil. Are things so much algorithmically determined that we run the danger then of having things that would be externalities to the algorithm, and so the bridge between the trustless world and the real world is where projects like Open Mustard Seed are trying to plant itself.
Does Open Mustard Seed help in terms of developers or?
Absolutely.
And supporters.
Okay, well, so that's what this is about.
One quick little thing. My actual day job at Bloomberg in the last 15 years is I actually do a lot of data science and graphical outputs. So anytime you look at the Bloomberg computer screens, I'm the one actually leading a lot of the efforts for taking data and visualizing it. That's why I'm actually stepping in the W3C is okay, why can't we use an HTML5 platform for your nice little slick user interfaces where people then don't have to focus on, you know, the back-end infrastructures and stuff for the payments themselves. Also, when everybody jumps up and down about Bitcoin, about the trust system on there, actually there's not a flaw in the Bitcoin technology in the network itself. The flaw in the trust is the bad human actors that were out there. So there's a lot of the current technologies that are out there that people are trying to use to take back their digital identifiers, like biometric identifiers tied to transactions. Those can be used to try and bring back, add trust back in the Bitcoin, because people only heard the negative, right? And even a lot of the regulators, they hear a lot of the Bitcoin fictions, right? They don't really hear the facts on there. So they hear the bad actors, and there's not really a trust issue with Bitcoin itself. It was, like I said, it was the bad actors. It was human players that caused the problems. It wasn't the Bitcoin technologies or the cryptocurrencies technologies themselves.
Well, is anyone worried about a 51% attack or someone controlling the network with most mining power?
The Bitcoin community is pretty close, very trusting on there. If one person starts approaching the 51%, then people are going to start back up. But they can't steal your Bitcoins anyways. They just have an unfair advantage in the mining of the new ones. So it's not like they can just go out and destroy your existing Bitcoins. And the financial transactions are still going to go through anyways. So I don't think there's an issue on that side. It's mainly on the mining side and putting proprietary, take precedence of one Bitcoin transaction over another and pushing it through and not delaying it for hours.
What if large companies got involved and put all their mining power or energy power to mine and push their transactions first? Do you see that being a possibility in a couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, everything is possible in there. I don't think it's really probable right now, to tell you the truth.
Well, I think one area to watch would probably be around the creation of the mining supercomputer or hosted Bitcoin mining, and for that I would wonder if just due to the sort of statistic nature of potential cartel forming a 51% attack and otherwise affecting the normal operation of Bitcoin. Some may call it inevitable, and or others might say, well, there's not really that much damage that could be done. I guess as more and more value gets leveraged across Bitcoin, and we start to see things like sidechain and so many more dependencies on it, I think we would probably be best to look for either algorithms or some sort of automated means to strengthen the security around the 51% attack. For instance, maybe something like a smart contract that's actually random sampling the pool of miners so that the chances that one particular group could take control of that 51% and any particular block is minimized as much as possible. So I think there's a lot of things worth exploring there, and we certainly are going to I think probably have to face the fact that it is a reality.
Okay, we don't have any questions, correct? Oh, we do.
One thing that I guess I'm a little confused on is, there are a lot of people with a lot to lose when a virtual currency does gain traction. And I guess I don't fully understand how you envision power players reacting to this and what they would do to try to snuff it. For example, the dollar, geopolitically, we use it many different ways to gain leverage around the world. And the fact that it is the international currency, the de facto currency, allows us to leverage debt in many different ways that other currencies can't. And it's not just the United States government, but also the Chinese government. These people in power seem like they have a lot to lose if there's a broader adoption of an alternative currency. And I've never quite understood how a truly open source initiative where there's no ownership could actually gain enough traction to not be legislated out of existence before it could actually become de facto global.
I'll take a quick crack at that. You're right there. When you look at what Ecuador did when they gave up their currency in adoption of the U.S. dollar, they lost a lot of their political power. So if you don't don't control your own currency, there's a big loss there. But on the flip side of it, how could Bitcoin really challenge the larger organizations? The thing is that Bitcoin, like I said, is R&D's largest community out there. So the brain power that's actually being devoted into this is, I would actually probably say, greater than the corporations themselves that are independently trying to do their own vertical silos and gaining value on there. And what was brought up earlier too as well on there was how getting Bitcoin adopted into the users. Bitcoin just may be used on the back end and not exposed to the users directly. Like for cross-border transactions, it's just phenomenal for it. So, but on the flip side, it's very easy for the banks and the governments right now that currently control the money supply to be adopters of the Bitcoin technology itself and release a digital currency that is fiat or government backed on there. That's actually being done at 3 countries right now, and trust me, even the U.S. government is looking at this stuff currently right now. So the infrastructure being put in, I mean, you bring up a lot of very good points. The infrastructure being developed in is very easy for very large entities to adopt and make use of internal too as well at a national or at a corporation levels or international level. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, it was really broad because, I mean, I think one of the answers you just said, though, is that what will become adopted will look different than what we have today, right? And that's essentially the answer.
Yes, what we have today is not what we're going to see in 5 years, which is going to be completely different than what we see in 10 and 20 years. Any other questions of the audience, please?
Can you use the mic, please?
I'll take this microphone, yeah. Okay, so I think that a part of his question was, could you, this seems pretty reasonable, conceive of a conflict situation where, say, to use the example, a nation state would be threatened or feel, people who run it feel threatened or challenged by the development of an independent currency that was, a democratic open source project in the way in terms of presenting a geopolitical threat to their power. And would they react in such a way to shut that down?
I actually think it's less likely that they'll try to shut it down because it's a geopolitical threat, and it's more likely that countries that are just trying to keep very complete control on the assets of their citizens become concerned when those citizens gain the ability to move assets out of the country. So, like if China may be one example where I think there's legitimate concern that people in Chinese citizens want to use their assets in ways that the country, that the government can't control, and they're very concerned about that. And I think that's part of what's behind trying to crack down a little bit on the virtual currency enterprises that previously have been flourishing in China. I think while it's theoretically possible that there would be a geopolitical threat to a country, especially if the country doesn't have a strong monetary base, I don't think we're anywhere near that, certainly not in well-developed economies.
Yeah, there's been a big, everybody's wanted a denationalized global currency for years. the reality of that is I just don't think we're going to see that in our lifetimes. So, but there are building blocks towards that, and I think this is more of a technology-based solution than a geopolitical threat to sovereign nations on there right now. So they're, like you said on there, they're going to go through and they're going to firewall these particular technologies and coins on there. So China doesn't want the assets leaving there. So they'll probably put a clamp down on the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency technology, as did quite a few other countries out there, Thailand, and I can name a few.
Yeah. On the other side of it, we already have a huge global underground economy, which will use whatever method, type of currency that is available. And Bitcoin may be attractive, but just dollars can be used, or anything else, potentially as well. So, last thought there. Okay, any more questions, or back to you, Tyler?
Anyone have any final statements?